Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join your chapter meeting. I first wanted to recognize, I wish that we were in person, but understand that there are some pretty crazy fires happening right now. I'm based in Pasadena, so the Eaton fire is not too far from where I am. Luckily, we're safe and hoping that the winds stay calm so that you all don't get affected as well. But I think during this time, leaning on community is so important, and really grateful to have the Audubon community. And so kind of on that theme, my presentation is really to show how the work of National Audubon, the state offices, and the local chapters, how we all come together to make a really big impact for birds and their habitats and for people. And so for my presentation, I'm going to be talking about how we're all contributing to these really big milestones that National has put forward for the next 5 years. And so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And I always use this picture, but this one now it's particularly a good photo for me to use. This is by Alicia Smith, who used to work for Ventura Audubon. Now she works for Audubon California, but I always love all of her pictures. And so we've got a sweet little plover here. So just a quick introduction. I'm Liliana Griego. I'm the Senior Coastal Program Manager for Audubon California. I've been with Audubon for 2.5 years now as an employee, but I started volunteering with Audubon in 2018. I was leading some nature walks along the LA River. I had just gotten my California Naturalist certification, but was really focused on plants. And as I was walking up and down the LA River, I started noticing all of these birds. And I kind of got hooked on them and was signing up for all the Audubon walks that I could, going with Pasadena Audubon, and then started volunteering at the Audubon Center at Debs Park, which is here in LA, through their bird banding program. And being able to hold a teeny tiny bird in my hand, I was so surprised by how light it was, how soft it was. And I haven't stopped looking at birds since. And I'm based in LA, but the work that I do supports, mainly I focus on coastal work. So supporting restoration projects, policy efforts, and chapters that are up and down our coastline. And this is a photo that Cynthia took of me on those first couple weeks when I just started going out looking at snowy plovers. And it was one of the best ways to get introduced to all of the amazing work that Ventura Audubon does and continues to do. So just kind of an overview of what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to talk about Audubon's flight plan. So this is the strategic plan that was released that really puts various goals within different topics. So the first one is around habitat conservation. The next category is climate action. We've got policy and community building. So there's various goals that fall within these different categories. And I'll go into each one of those, what's already been done to help reach those goals and what we'll continue to do, both at the national, state, and local level. And I'll talk about, ways to continue to move these efforts forward, things to look forward to for this year, and then we'll kind of open it up for questions even throughout the program. But if you have questions at the end, we can have a discussion there then as well. So the title of my presentation is Bending the Bird Curve. So what does that mean? Since 1970, we've lost 3 billion birds in North America. And so there's been this major decline in bird population. which you can see here in this graph. So instead of seeing that decline continue, Audubon put together what's called the flight plan to try to turn that curve upwards so that we see a positive impact on bird population instead of continuing this very sad decline. And so the flight plan is this strategic plan that got started getting implemented in 2023 and will continue until 2028. And so it's broken up into these 4 different categories with different metrics associated to it. So the first one is habitat conservation. The goal there being to basically conserve 300 million acres of habitat for birds. And this isn't just in the United States. This is also Canada. This is also Mexico. This is a lot of work happening in Peru, in South America as well. So this is the Americas of the work that's happening and that Audubon is helping to support. The second is around climate action. So with the goal of having 100 gigawatts of new renewable generation and transmission sites. And then as well as having 30 billion tons of carbon kept stored in forests, wetlands, and grasslands. So essentially, how do we invest in nature-based solutions so that we can sequester this carbon? The third category is policy. National put together a Healthy Birds, Healthy Planet policy agenda that just has a lot of priorities in creating more bird habitat, having a focus on specific bird species. And so in our advocacy, we're really trying to advocate for birds. And then lastly is community building. So how do we increase engagement with people? How do we create more partnerships and coalitions and creating those goals so that we can continue to advance these goals that we have in mind for the next couple of years. And then just so that folks are aware, Audubon has that weird structure that can be a little bit confusing, but it's very similar to our government structure. So you have like federal, state, and local. Federal is national, right? They're really focused on taking initiatives that are more on a nationwide level. And then you have state, and that's like Audubon California. So that's who I'm representing. And the work that we do is mainly focused on more of a statewide level. And there's several different state offices throughout the country. So we tend to call ourselves like the field office for national. And then we have our chapters, and that's the local level, right? That's on the ground work and really engaging the local community to get involved in these greater initiatives. And so I just wanted to give a little overview of the chapters nationally and in California. So in total, throughout the country, there's 409 Audubon chapters. California has 49 chapters. We have the most chapters out of any state in the country. In total, there's almost 80,000 members within the Audubon network, and around 13,000 of them are here in California. And then lots of volunteers, right? You just recognize some great volunteers who are leading bird walks for you all. In total, nationally, there's 40,000 volunteers, with 7,000 of them here in California. So jumping into the first category within the flight plan is habitat conservation, with the goal of conserving 300 million acres. So currently, the work that's happening right now nationally, they are working on conserving 116 million acres through the Americas. Chapters throughout the country are also contributing to this. So they're contributing to stewarding, or they own 250,000 acres of land. And then within California, there are 15 chapters that steward and protect around 7,000 acres of land here in California. And then I just had to add this in at the last minute because this is something that we're very excited about. This just happened. President Biden just signed the designation to create the Chuckwalla National Monument, which is just outside of the Salton Sea, and that's protecting 627,000 acres of land. And our Salton Sea team has been working on this for a very long time. They've really been strong leaders, and it shows because this afternoon at 3 p.m., one of our members from the Salton Sea team introduced Joe Biden so that he could sign the designation of the monument. So that's for Ryan there at the podium about to introduce the president. So literally just happened a few hours ago, which I just feel like in this moment where things are feeling very depressing and sad and, like what is happening? This was such a welcome thing that just like lifted everyone's spirit. So I wanted to include that, and it's a major contribution for habitat conservation. I also wanted to just give some case studies of work that's happening in California to contribute to habitat conservation as well. And really focusing on collaboration. So in San Diego County, Audubon California is working with Buena Vista Audubon Society and San Diego Bird Alliance, formerly San Diego Audubon Society, to work to conserve and restore 920 acres of coastal lagoon habitat along Mission Bay and Buena Vista Lagoon. If you've ever been to San Diego County, Mission Bay is where like SeaWorld is. It's where like big fireworks shows go. It's where boat shows are. It's like it's known as this like aquatic recreational space. It's not even like recognized as a bay. So heavily impacted by human activity and disturbance. Buena Vista Lagoon has also been heavily impacted. It's the only freshwater lagoon within San Diego County because they cut off the access of the salt water to go into the lagoon. And so that lagoon itself is very impacted as well. So we have been working with these chapters, focusing on the Ridgway's rail as our species that we're really focused on, and working to advocate for restoration of these sites, creating restoration plans for these sites, and really ensuring that the restoration moving forward is community driven. So these chapters have been partnering with local tribes and indigenous groups to really make sure that they are helping to craft and create the future of these sites. So thinking about, what is the plant palette going to look like? How do we make sure that the plants that we have are going to be appropriate culturally for the indigenous people of the area so that they could use them for ceremonies and medicine, making sure that there's a gathering site so they can come and practice any ceremonies that they might need. A lot of these local tribal members have been displaced and have been forced to move inland. So how do we allow them to create or reestablish their relationship with their ancestral land and make sure that they have access to their land? And so these are the things that we're thinking about. So, it's not just about acres, but it's also, we're restoring the land, but we're also restoring the relationships that people had with the land as well. So this is one example of the work that we're doing, creating platforms for the Ridgway's rail as well. Mission Bay is impacted by sea level rise and is going to continue to be impacted by sea level rise. So how do we make sure we're protecting the Ridgway's rail? So they're creating platforms, installing wildlife cameras, and being able to see inside the life of these very elusive birds. which has been really exciting to see. So that's a really great example of collaborating with chapters and with Audubon California in ensuring that we are conserving as much habitat as possible. The second example that I wanted to talk about was the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Some of you all might have been involved in this or heard about this. This was the first tribally nominated sanctuary that is protecting over 4,500 square miles of the California coast and the waters. This was a collaboration that National Audubon California and Morro Coast Audubon worked on to really support the tribes and their effort in creating this sanctuary. We were able to get almost 19,000 Audubon members to submit support letters for this designation. Maybe some of you on this call were able to do that through our easy platform. But our focus there was the brown pelican, the Brandt's cormorants, the pink-footed, and the sooty shearwaters. So really trying to advocate for the initial boundary to be designated. Unfortunately, they reduced the size of the initial boundary, but they are having a phased approach. So eventually, the full boundary that was originally nominated will be protected. And so we're continuing to advocate for that, especially because some of the areas that got left out are crucial habitat areas for some of these species that we were focused on. So we're going to continue to monitor that. But the fact that we did get 4,500 square miles protected is a big contribution, again, to this milestone that we have in terms of protecting bird habitat throughout the country. So moving on to climate action. Right now, National is working on 50 renewable energy generation and transmission projects, which are totaling up to 34 gigawatts. They just released a report called The Birds and Offshore Wind, Developing the Offshore Wind That Birds Need. They sent it out maybe last week, so it's very, very new. So if you're interested in learning more about offshore wind, how to make sure we are avoiding any issues and impacts to birds, this is a really great report to dive into, and I can share the link at the end and put it in the chat here. And I can also share these slides, which has the link to it as well. But yeah, just release that and hopefully going to be able to use that as a tool as we advocate for proper siting of offshore wind along our coast. And then a lot of chapters are also getting involved in clean energy activities. So there were 16 clean energy activities throughout the country that chapters led. Then they were able to do that a total of 51 times. And just thinking about, what types of renewable energy projects are our chapters pursuing. We have 25 activities are centered around solar energy, 5 activities were around wind energy, and then 20 activities of others. So, looking at ways to engage through advocacy or through outreach and engaging folks so that people can have a better understanding of how we can have renewable energy, but also make sure that we're not impacting birds and their habitat. One thing that Audubon California is doing in this realm is looking at eelgrass. So we just launched an eelgrass habitat suitability model that will be used. Actually, it just started to be used in San Francisco Bay to help inform climate smart restoration. So the data that's been collected here is looking at existing eelgrass habitat that's within, San Francisco Bay, and then looking at potential impacts of future scenarios. So high temperature, sea level rise, how is that going to impact these areas? And that should then help inform agencies, cities, of where they should be focusing their restoration in to make sure that it won't get impacted later on. So this is something that has been successful in San Francisco Bay. And this is like one of the most like complex bay systems. So the fact that we were able to figure out how to do it for this area will now allow us to start expanding and applying this model to other bays up and down the coast as well. The third category is policy. So nationally, there have been 9 policies at the federal level and 38 policies at the state level that National has been able to move forward when it comes to protecting birds and their habitat. There were over 1,300 advocacy events held by chapters throughout the country, engaging over 22,000 people. And, chapters have met with elected officials, and a lot of their advocacy events also include elected officials and decision makers. And I know that Ventura Audubon is one of those chapters as well. So engaging in this and making sure that, we're involving as many people as possible, inviting as many people as possible so that we can really move our agenda forward. Here in California, we had some big wins. The first being the climate bond. This was a $10 billion bond that will be used to support a variety of climate and natural resource projects. And we were a big advocate for this bond, and we were really happy to see it move forward. So knowing, that here in California, we are investing in climate solutions, and there will be funding for us to move forward with those projects as well. The second piece of legislation that got passed last year was a no net loss of wetlands. So Audubon California co-sponsored this legislation that basically just codifies in state policy that there will be no net loss of wetlands. So the small amount of wetlands that we have right now, making sure that we are not going to lose any more of them. So if a wetland does get impacted, then they're going to have to go and help expand wetland habitat somewhere else. This is legislation that really makes sure that we are not going to lose any more wetlands. And then the last piece of legislation is the Salton Sea Conservancy. So this creates a conservancy for the Salton Sea, which is necessary to ensure that there's long-term management, that there's funds that an agency is holding and can distribute those funds to make sure there's restoration happening, there's engagement happening, and there's management happening. So again, this was another piece of legislation that Audubon was engaged in to really make sure that this would be created. And then the last piece of policy that I wanted to cover is not exactly legislation, but involvement in state agencies. So we've been working on, snowy plovers are a priority species for Audubon Society. And we've been really working hard to determine, how do we protect these sensitive species? And we've been able to work with Ventura Audubon and Santa Barbara Audubon, specifically around SpaceX and the increased launches at Vandenberg Space Force, and the impacts that the increase of those launches are going to have on snowy plovers. So submitting comment letters, making public comment at the Coastal Commission meetings, Being able to lean on our chapters and being able to collaborate is really, really important. And so just grateful to have that network so that we can all work together. And also just highlighting the importance of the chapters and the need for all of us to collaborate and communicate with one another so that we can make sure that we're protecting these threatened and endangered species that are very vulnerable on our coastline. So the last category is community building. And this milestone is probably the biggest one that a chapter contributes to. Right, this is the on the ground work. This is engaging local communities. This is the bird walks, right? This is the presentations, the chapter meetings. And these things are so necessary to make sure that we are protecting birds. And so this was just an interesting chart that I found that shows the different types of engagement that chapters do. So clearly the biggest way that chapters engage community members is through bird outings and bird walks. But then there's also engagement in classes and presentations, as well as education. And while these types of engagement aren't as common, they actually engage a lot of people, right? So you're looking at classes and presentations that happens a total time right around 4,000 times, but you're reaching 100,000 people. And same goes for education, right? You're not having them that frequently, but you're engaging a lot of people while you do that. So I just thought that was interesting data in terms of, what activities chapters are doing and how those activities reach a variety of people. And then just to highlight some of the activity that California chapters are doing and how they're contributing to nationals goals and what nationally what all the chapters are doing. So there was almost 5,000 total activities that happened in California. And that contributes to the 33,000 that occurred nationally that chapters led throughout the country. 60,000 participants in California, and then 33% of new participants for each of these activities. So actually reaching a broad audience and bringing in new people, which is great. In terms of volunteers, right, there's around 7,000 total volunteers in California, contributing to 40,000 nationally. And Ventura Audubon is actually one of the top 10 chapters in the state that recruits the most new volunteers. So I thought that was a fun stat to share with you all, that you are all doing actually a really great job bringing in new volunteers and getting new folks to feel part of your chapter and to help contribute to leading events and creating, safer spaces for birds. And then I wanted to highlight a community building program that just launched last year. This was the inaugural Coastal Leadership Program. That was a program that really aims to create an inclusive community for those who don't see themselves well represented in the conservation field. So this was a way for folks to come together, feel a sense of community, and start learning about the different pathways that they can get involved in conservation, and specifically around coastal conservation. So they went on various field trips. They had 12 evening sessions at the Audubon Center at Debs Park, where they learned about different topics around coastal conservation, from like what is restoration to what is a threatened and endangered species. And then we had a lot of guest speakers come in They talked about their experience in working in the conservation field, and them having the opportunity to have small discussions with these experts and really understand, what was your path to get to where you are today? What do you do? How do you get there? And so it was a really great and successful program. Each student did a capstone project, so they reached, over 150 individuals within their communities through their capstone projects. And there's one individual who was in this program. And after each of our field trips, we offer an opportunity of reflection. And so after one of our field trips, we were going around the table at lunch, asking people, whoever wants to share, feel free to share. And this one individual raised her hand, and she's kind of notorious for being very quiet and shy. So the fact that she raised her hand, we're like, oh, okay, what do you want to share? And she shared that, she had just graduated from a pretty toxic academic environment where she didn't feel comfortable and she felt really out of her element. And when we were out on our field trip, we did transect lines, and we were looking and identifying different plants in the sand dunes. And she said, the field trip host asked if anyone had ever done this before. And I didn't want to raise my hand because I had done it before, but I was so uncomfortable when I did it in college that I didn't want to raise my hand because I didn't want them to call on me. She said, but I'm so grateful that I was able to come back to this in a more comfortable setting and learn. And she's like, now I actually feel like this is a career that I can do in my future. And so hearing that we created that safe space for her to feel comfortable and confident in doing this work in restoration is really, why the program exists. So we're really excited to see this program thrive and bringing it back again, and hopefully having a field trip in Ventura the next time we have it. Because I think it'll be really great for folks to see the different ecosystems along our coast and how they vary so much. And then lastly, looking forward, I just wanted to provide some opportunities and share some opportunities for folks to continue to be involved. I know, several of you are out leading bird outings, are maybe head of committees or members of committees, but just wanted to share a few more ways that folks can be involved and learn more. The first one is a webinar. So I mentioned that there is this offshore wind report that National Audubon just released last week, and they will be hosting a webinar February 12th to talk about that report. There's going to be a lot of folks from high management who work on offshore wind that will be presenting the information that they've gathered for this report. And so it'll be a really informative webinar where they'll go into details about offshore wind, about Audubon's stance on it, the science behind some of these recommendations that they have. And so if you're curious about that, I would highly recommend this webinar, and I can share the link for folks who might be interested to sign up for that. The second is the Audubon Leadership Conference. If you haven't heard about that, it's an opportunity where various leaders from chapters across the country come together and learn about various issues, learn about programs that other chapters are doing, an opportunity to learn from one another, meet other chapters, and just share your experiences. I went last year. It happens like every other year. So I went two years ago. And it's an incredible experience if you're able to go. This year it will be in Montreal, which is maybe good and bad. It's kind of far, but very cool place to go. And they do, National does offer scholarships for certain folks. So if you meet their criteria, they could potentially help you financially. But just a great way to connect and meet other Audubon folks. Again, building that community and reminding yourself that the work that you're doing locally is contributing to something so much bigger on a national level. And then lastly, we have Prop 4. So I mentioned that was the climate bond was a big victory that we had last year, and now they will start rolling out the funds to start supporting these restoration projects that people have in mind. And so, you know, being on the lookout of when these funds roll out and how to be an advocate for your area, for restoration areas that you have in mind, for priorities that you want to focus on. Prop 4 is going to be a great source of funding. And again, it's nice to be reassured that the state is investing in these things. And this is, you know, the way to tap into those funds to get things going. And bonds are a little bit tricky in terms of what they actually fund. It's mainly, you know, infrastructure, but it can be like nature-based infrastructure. But yeah, there's some restrictions there, but overall, I think it's going to be great in terms of making sure that some priority sites that we want to see restored actually get restored. And that is all I have. So thank you. And if anyone has questions.
It's Vince.
Hi.
I have a question, and it might be a little wonky for you, but regarding the offshore wind paper,
Mhm.
I'm definitely, so one of our members, David Pretzka, actually works for the Department of the Interior and does offshore wind. It's a big project of his. I'd like to get a copy of that paper and potentially just have him take a look at it and see where they're going. Of course, in 2 weeks, this may change, right? Because the new administration is not necessarily positive on wind energy. But I believe he may be publishing a few papers as well. That might be a great way to collaborate and potentially get some more data to you.
Yeah, definitely. Let me put in the chat right now 2 links. The first one to the report, it's publicly available. It's on our website already. And then the link to sign up to the webinar as well.
I have another question. This is a lot more along your swim and Liliana. For us, both Rachel and I, we compile the annual report. Is that kind of your source of data for the metrics that you showed us about volunteerism and participation? Okay, so from our perspective as a chapter, and I know Frank is also a member of or on the board of CNAO, getting those metrics to you via that report is the best way to convey participation in like our activities.
Yes, all that data that I shared throughout this presentation is from all the chapter reports from 2023, because they're still reviewing. I guess you haven't submitted 2024 yet, right? That's due at like the end of March or something.
Correct. But yeah, that's just metrics that we need to gather, and we can really concentrate on that and give you a better picture from what we're doing than we did last year, I hope.
Great. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, they've got National has this great platform that just compiles all that information together. So we really get to see like statewide what the impact is, and then nationally what the impact is. So yeah, the more accurate you can get with that information, the better.
This is kind of an open-ended question, and I'm sure you're getting this. And I don't really know exactly what I'm asking, other than, you know, there's a lot of concern about the incoming administration and fears of rollbacks on things that we've achieved. So that's kind of the part where we get to the point where I'm not exactly sure what my question is. I guess maybe that's more of a statement. I'm wondering if you just have any feedback on that, or reassurances, or, You know, how do we
Mhm.
move forward?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's kind of on everyone's mind, and Audubon does try to say, you know, we're bipartisan, and so we want to be able to work with any type of administration that comes in, but recognizing that maybe, you know, this administration might reduce funding for certain things or roll back certain things. I think that's where we really lean on California and kind of be grateful of the state that we are all living in. You know, the climate bond is $10 billion. So, you know, maybe there'll be some cuts on the federal level, but there won't be cuts on the state level. So we can at least be applying for funding there and making sure that we're still on track with different projects that we have in mind. And just being able to lean on the state a little bit more. And I think the state recognizes that too, right? Like that was definitely on everyone's mind of like, we need to get this bond passed because we don't know what's going to happen. And I know there was a lot of work before the election, just like we don't know what's going to happen, so let's put in these, let's try to move some policies through that will make sure that we are protecting the things that we've been fighting for so long. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. But you know, there's still some good legislation, good funding that is available here in California that we can at least lean on.
Is there going to be an advocacy day this next year? I guess this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our policy team was like just one person for a while, which is why we didn't have it last year. We just hired a new what's his title? Like government affairs manager in Sacramento this month. So I think, you know, we'll let him get settled in a little bit, and then yeah, maybe he'll do one this year, and if not this year, hopefully next year. Yeah, we'll see. But I know a lot of people have been missing those advocacy days. So figuring out when we can bring that back.
Yeah, with COVID, it got complicated, so I think it kind of took a hit with that. Well, I appreciate the information we get from California Audubon on legislation that is important to us. I definitely pay a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, we'll keep a lookout, and yeah, there's not a whole lot of movement happening right now, but as legislation gets introduced, and you know, maybe we'll co-sponsor something again this year, we'll be sure to keep you all updated.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, folks.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Night.